I stared at the group chat notification lighting up my phone, a familiar mix of excitement and dread washing over me. The annual family vacation planning had begun, and despite everything, a small part of me still hoped this year would be different. But as I scrolled through the messages, my stomach dropped. They had already decided on dates, accommodations, and activities, without even asking if I was available. It wasn't an oversight. It was the moment I finally understood that in my father's eyes, I would always be the outsider, never truly part of the family he built with his real children. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started so normally. I was sitting on the deck of my beach house in Monterey, the one I'd purchased 3 years ago after my promotion to senior marketing director. The fog was just starting to lift, revealing the shimmer of the Pacific Ocean below. This place was my sanctuary, my achievement, the physical manifestation of everything I'd built on my own. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very family who considered me an afterthought would soon be asking to use it. I took a sip of my coffee, scrolling through work emails when the family group chat notification appeared. My half-siblings, Allison, Carson, and Sky, were excitedly discussing the summer trip to Lake Tahoe. My stepmother Jade had already reserved 3 cabins. My father Phineas was arranging boat rentals. It was all happening, and not once had anyone asked me if I wanted to join. We should confirm the dates with everyone, Allison had written. Mom, Dad, Carson, Sky, and me are all good for July 15, 22, she continued, listing everyone but me. I waited, thinking perhaps someone would notice the omission. Minutes passed. More messages about meal planning and activities flooded in. Nothing. With shaking hands, I finally typed, "Should I check my calendar too?" The typing indicators appeared and disappeared. 3 minutes passed before my father responded. "Haley, this trip is just for the immediate family." Immediate family. The words stung like a physical slap. I'd been in his life since I was 6 years old, when my mother died and he became my only parent. Before he married Jade, before Allison, Carson and Sky were born. 28 years of being his daughter, yet somehow not immediate enough. "I am your family too," I wrote back, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. The response came faster this time. "You know what I mean. This is for Jade and the kids." The kids. As if I wasn't his child too. I set my phone down, staring out at the ocean. The beauty before me suddenly seemed hollow. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my place in a family that had decided long ago that I didn't truly belong. My father had raised me alone after my mother's death, and for 6 years it had been just the two of us. He'd been my hero, my entire world. Then he met Jade, and suddenly I was expected to be grateful for my new family. When Allison was born, I was 12, old enough to notice how his face softened when he held her in a way it never did with me. By the time Carson and Sky came along, I had become the built-in babysitter, the responsible oldest child who should know better and set an example. The phone buzzed again. A private message from my father. "Haley, don't make this difficult. You're an adult with your own life. This trip is for the younger ones. You understand?" I did understand. Finally, after years of making excuses for him, I understood perfectly. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could do what I always did, swallow the hurt, pretend it was fine, tell myself that it was logical for him to prioritize his younger children. I could play the role of the understanding, adult daughter, but something had shifted inside me. Perhaps it was seeing the conversation unfold so plainly in black and white, without the usual cushion of plausible deniability. Perhaps it was the cumulative weight of 1,000 small rejections over the years. Or perhaps it was simply that. At 34, I was finally ready to acknowledge the truth. I took a deep breath and typed, "You're right, Dad. I am an adult with my own life." An adult who doesn't need to keep trying to be part of a family that doesn't want her. I sent the message before I could second-guess myself. Then I did something I had never done before. I muted the group chat. No more watching from the sidelines, as they shared their inside jokes and memories of trips I hadn't been invited to join. My phone immediately rang. Dad. I declined the call. Another call. Jade. Declined. A text from Allison. Why are you being so dramatic? It's just a vacation. Just a vacation. Just another exclusion. Just another reminder that I was different from the others. I walked inside and made another cup of coffee, trying to focus on the tangible things around me. The warm mug in my hands, the sound of waves crashing below, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows of the home I had built for myself. My sanctuary. My achievement. The phone buzzed again with another group message. This time I looked. Jade. Your father and I think you're overreacting. We were going to invite you for the weekend portion if you wanted to come. The weekend portion. Like I was an acquaintance, not family. The backhanded invitation only confirmed what I already knew. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching solo trips to Portugal. Something I'd always wanted to do but had put off, usually because the dates conflicted. With some family obligation that, in retrospect, I had never been central to anyway. As I browsed flights and accommodations, a strange sense of lightness began to replace the heaviness in my chest. For the first time, I was prioritizing myself without guilt, without seeking approval, without trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided what I was worth to them. My phone rang again. Dad. This time, I answered. Haley, you're being childish, he said immediately, not bothering with a greeting. No, Dad, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. For the first time, I'm not being the child who desperately wants her father's approval. I'm being an adult who knows her worth. This is ridiculous. We've always included you in everything. The lie was so blatant that I actually laughed. Dad, you literally just told me the family vacation is only for your real children. Your words, not mine. I never said real children, he protested. You said immediate family, and the kids. What exactly did you mean by that, if not to distinguish them from me? His silence was answer enough. It's fine, I continued. And strangely, I was starting to mean it. You've made your choices clear for years. I've just been too afraid to accept them, but I'm not afraid anymore. What's that supposed to mean? His voice had that edge it always got when he felt challenged. It means I'm booking a trip to Portugal for July 15th, 22. Enjoy Lake Tahoe. I ended the call before he could respond. Then I turned off my phone completely, took my coffee out to the deck, and watched the waves roll in, one after another, steady and unstoppable, like the realization that had finally broken through years of denial. I deserved better, and it was time to stop waiting for them to see it. Little did I know that in exactly 3 months, my father would be calling with an entirely different tone in his voice, one that included the words beach house and favor, and revealed just how conditional family loyalty could be. The week after my conversation with Dad passed in a blur of work calls and project deadlines. I threw myself into my job with renewed focus, as if professional success could somehow fill the family-shaped hole I'd been carrying since childhood. My team at Wilson and Brooks Marketing barely noticed the change. I'd always been the first, one in and the last to leave, the one who volunteered for weekend emergencies and holiday coverage. Work had been my refuge long before I consciously recognized why I needed one. My friend Arlo noticed, though. We met for our standing Thursday, dinner at the small Mediterranean place near the office. You seem different, she said, studying me over her glass of wine. More, I don't know, intense? Did something happen with the family again? I poked at my falafel, considering whether I wanted to get into it. Arlo had been witness to the Phineas Martinez family dynamics for over a decade, ever since we'd met. In college. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had a front row seat to every disappointment, every last-minute cancellation, every family-only event I wasn't quite family enough for. "They're planning the annual summer trip," I said finally. "Lake Tahoe this year." Arlo's expression tightened. She knew what that meant without me having to explain. "And let me guess, you found out through the group chat, not because anyone actually invited you?" I nodded, taking a sip of my water. "Dad made it very clear it's for immediate family only. His wife and their kids." "Jesus, Haley, I'm sorry." I shrugged, aiming for nonchalance. "It's fine. I'm going to Portugal instead." Her eyebrows shot up. "Portugal? By yourself?" "Why not? I've always wanted to go. The Douro Valley, Porto, Lisbon. I've had a Pinterest. Bored for years." "That's actually awesome," Arlo said slowly, her surprise morphing into a smile. "It's about time you did something for yourself instead of waiting around for them to throw you scraps of inclusion." The way she phrased it made me flinch. Had that been what I was doing all these years, waiting for scraps? But I knew she was right. How many holidays had I rearranged my schedule for, only to spend the day feeling like an awkward house guest? How many of Allison's, Carson's, and Sky's school events and celebrations had I attended, playing the role of supportive big sister, while my own accomplishments went unacknowledged? The beach house itself was a perfect example. When I closed on it 3 years ago, the biggest achievement of my life, I'd invited the whole family for a weekend celebration. Dad and Jade had begged off, citing Sky's soccer tournament. Allison came but spent the entire time complaining about the spotty cell reception. Only Carson seemed genuinely happy to be there, but he was 14 then, and mainly excited about the beach access. Not one of them had said they were proud of me. "You know what's funny?" I said to Arlo, setting down my fork. "When I bought the beach house, Dad's first comment wasn't congratulations. It was, 'That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age.' I was 31 with a six-figure salary and a stellar credit score." Arlo rolled her eyes. "Meanwhile, I bet he helped Allison with the down payment on her condo." The accuracy of that guess made me laugh despite myself. $50,000. A loan that we all know will never be repaid. And Carson's car? Paid? In full. A graduation present. And I'm guessing Sky's college will be fully funded, yes? I finished my wine in one long swallow. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs through school and took out loans like everyone else. Arlo reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know that's messed up, right? You're allowed to be angry about it." Was I angry? The emotion felt too hot, too active for what I'd been carrying all these years. It was more like a dull ache, a constant background awareness that I would always have to work harder for less recognition, less support, less love. "I think I'm just tired," I admitted, tired of trying to earn a place at a table where there was never going to be a seat for me. Later that night, as I drove home along the coast, I thought about how long I'd been making excuses for my father. When I was younger, it was, "Dad's stressed about the new baby," or "Jade needs more help with the kids." As I got older, it became, "They have 3 children at home to worry about," or "They're still building their family unit." But I was part of that family too, or at least I was supposed to be. I remembered my 6th birthday, the last one with my mother before cancer took her. She had thrown me a princess party, complete with a castle cake and tiny tiaras for all my friends. "You'll always be my real-life princess," she had whispered as she tucked me in that night. After she died, the birthday celebrations became more subdued. By the time Jade entered the picture, they had dwindled to a card and maybe a modest gift if I was lucky. The contrast with my half-siblings' elaborate parties, bouncy castles for Carson, professional makeup artists for Allison's Sweet 16, a rented movie theater for Sky's 10th birthday, couldn't have been more stark. I pulled into my driveway, the security light illuminating the front of my beach house. It sat perched on the cliff, Windows dark except for the timer lights I'd set. My sanctuary. The place where I never had to feel like an afterthought. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a small glass of whiskey, then carried it out, to the deck. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The sound of waves crashing below was hypnotic, soothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Carson. "Are you really not coming to Tahoe at all? Not even for a day?" Sweet Carson, the only one who sometimes remembered to include me. At 17, he was too young to fully understand the family dynamics at play, too young to recognize the patterns that had been established long before he was born. I stared at his message, unsure how to respond. The truth was, even if I wanted to join them for a day, and part of me did, if only for Carson's sake, the damage had already been done. I couldn't pretend my father's words hadn't cut deep, couldn't play along with the fiction that we were one big, happy family when I'd been so explicitly defined as outside that circle. But as I composed and deleted several responses, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I wasn't agonizing over how to please my family. I wasn't mentally rearranging my schedule to accommodate their plans. I wasn't swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. Instead, I was thinking about Portugal, about cobblestone streets and historic trams, about wine tastings and ceramic tiles, about experiencing something new entirely on my own terms. It felt like freedom. I finally responded to Carson's text with a simple, "I won't be joining this year, planning my own trip to Portugal instead. Hope you have fun, though." I added a smiley face at the end to soften it, not wanting him to feel like my distance was his fault. His reply came almost immediately. "Portugal sounds way cooler than Tahoe. Dad's being weird about the whole thing. Says you're overreacting." A flicker of irritation sparked in my chest. Of course, Dad would frame this as me overreacting, as if the problem was my response to being excluded rather than the exclusion itself. It was a pattern so familiar I could set my watch by it. Dad or Jade would do something hurtful, I would express pain, and somehow I'd end up being the unreasonable one. I took a deep breath, watching the moonlight shimmer on the dark ocean below. My deck. How should I respond to Carson? He was caught in the middle, too young to fully grasp the complicated history at play. I didn't want to burden him with my hurt, but I also didn't want to perpetuate the fiction that everything was fine. "It's complicated," I wrote back. "But don't worry about it. Tell me what you're most excited about for the trip." Redirecting the conversation seemed safest. Carson launched into enthusiastic messages about the jet skis Dad had reserved and the hiking trails they planned to explore. I responded with appropriate enthusiasm, ignoring the hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Later that night, as I crawled into bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures from holidays and family gatherings over the years. I noticed something I'd never consciously acknowledged before. In almost every group photo, I was positioned at the edge of the frame, slightly separate from the tight cluster of Dad, Jade, and my half-siblings. In some, I appeared to have been an afterthought, squeezed in awkwardly after the initial composition was set. Even in photographs, I was an appendage to the real family, not an integral part of it. The realization hit me with unexpected force. I set my phone down, my hands shaking slightly. Had it always been this way? Had I simply refused to see what was right in front of me all along? I thought about my mother then, her warm smile, the way she'd made me feel like the center of her universe. After she died, I'd transferred all that need for belonging onto my father, desperate to remain the focus of at least one parent's love. But the truth was, from the moment Jade entered the picture, I'd been slowly but steadily displaced. The memories rushed back with painful clarity. Dad missing my high school graduation because Allison, then only 6, had a mild fever. The summer, He promised to help me move into my college dorm, but canceled last minute when Jade needed him to take Carson to a doctor's appointment. The promotion dinner he left early because Sky had a nightmare and was asking for him. Each incident, viewed in isolation, could be explained away. Collectively, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying years of subtle rejections and not-so-subtle favoritism. By morning, I felt hollow-eyed but strangely clear-headed, as if the fog of denial had finally lifted. I made coffee and carried it out to the deck, watching the morning mist roll in from the Pacific. My phone buzzed with a text from Jade, the first direct communication since our tense exchange about the vacation. "Haley, I think you misunderstood what your father was trying to say. Of course, you're welcome to join us for part of the trip. We just assumed with your busy work schedule you wouldn't want to commit to the full week." Another buzz. A separate message from Dad. "Stop giving Jade a hard time. She's trying to make things right." I stared at the messages, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. This was their version of an olive branch? Blaming me for misunderstanding and explicit exclusion, then accusing me of giving Jade a hard time when I hadn't even responded to her? That old, familiar pressure built inside me. The urge to smooth things over, to accept the inadequate gesture and pretend it was enough, to maintain the peace at the cost of my own dignity. I'd done it countless times before, swallowing my hurt to keep from rocking the boat. But something had shifted inside me. The realization that had kept me awake all night had fundamentally altered something in how I saw myself in relation to my family. I deserved better than this. The thought appeared in my mind with startling clarity. I deserved better. Not because I was special or entitled, but because this was not how family was supposed to treat family. This constant positioning as an outsider, this requirement that I be endlessly understanding of their needs while my own were routinely dismissed, it wasn't right. My fingers hovered over the phone. The old Haley would have responded with something conciliatory. "It's fine, I understand. Have a great time." The new awareness dawning inside me demanded something different. "I haven't given anyone a hard time," I typed to my father. "I simply decided to make other plans when it became clear I wasn't a priority for this family trip. I'm not available to join for any portion of the week. Enjoy Tahoe." To Jade, I wrote nothing at all. Her message didn't actually require a response, and for once I didn't feel obligated to provide one. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, surprisingly calm. No racing heart, no sick feeling in my stomach. Just a quiet certainty that I had finally responded to their treatment of me with the appropriate level of self-respect. My phone immediately began ringing. Dad. I silenced it without answering. It rang again. And again. Finally, I turned it off completely and set it aside. Whatever crisis my boundary setting had provoked in my father, it was not my responsibility to manage his emotions about it. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own emotional well-being over his comfort. It felt terrifying. It felt necessary. It felt long overdue. I spent the morning researching Portugal in earnest, booking flights and accommodations, creating an itinerary that excited me. By noon, my trip was fully planned and paid for. 10 days exploring Porto, the Douro Valley, and Lisbon, including a food tour, wine tastings, and a private sailing excursion on the Tagus River. The total came to just under $5,000, a sum that would have given me pause a few years ago, but now felt like a worthwhile investment in my happiness. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 7 missed calls from Dad, 3 from Jade, and 1 from Allison. There were multiple texts, ranging from concerned to irritated to outright angry. "Dad, call me back immediately. We need to discuss this attitude of yours." Jade, "Your father is upset. Please call him." Allison, "Why are you being so difficult? Just come for the weekend if you want to." Dad again. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is unacceptable. The last message, time-stamped just 30 minutes ago, was from Carson. Whatever's happening with Dad and you, I still want you to know I wish you were coming. But Portugal sounds amazing. Will you send me pictures? A lump formed in my throat. Sweet Carson, always the peacemaker, always the one who seemed to genuinely value my presence. I responded to him alone. Of course I'll send pictures, and maybe someday we can go together. Love you, kiddo. For the rest, I had nothing more to say. The time for explanations and justifications was over. They either understood why their treatment of me was hurtful, or they didn't. Either way, I was done contorting myself to fit into the margins of their family portrait. As I set my phone aside again, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not the usual anxiety or hurt, but something stronger, more solid. It took me a moment to recognize it. Self-respect. I managed to avoid direct communication with my father for 3 whole days. It wasn't that difficult. I went to work, came home, and simply didn't answer his calls. I responded to Carson's occasional texts, but ignored the increasingly irritated messages from Dad, Jade, and Allison. On the 4th day, my peaceful bubble burst. I was heading out of the office for my lunch break when I spotted a familiar figure. Waiting in the lobby, my father, arms crossed, a thunderous expression on his face. Dad? I stopped short, my stomach dropping. What are you doing here? Since you won't answer my calls, I didn't have much choice, he said, voice tight with barely contained frustration. We need to talk. Several colleagues glanced our way, curious about the tension crackling in the air. I forced a smile, gesturing toward the exit. Let's go somewhere else. We walked in strained silence to a small cafe around the corner. Once seated with coffees neither of us really wanted, Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. Haley, this has gone on long enough. You're acting like a child. The familiar accusation landed exactly as it always had, like a slap. Whenever I expressed hurt or disagreed with him, I was acting like a child. It was his favorite way to dismiss my feelings. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, determined to remain calm. What specifically are you referring to? This tantrum. About the vacation. Refusing to answer calls. Booking some solo trip to Portugal instead of joining your family. It's immature and it's upsetting, Jade. Of course it was about Jade's feelings. It always came back to that. It's not a tantrum, I said quietly. It's a boundary. A boundary? He scoffed. Against what? Your own family? That's just it, Dad. You made it very clear that I'm not really part of the family when you said the trip was for immediate family only. You're twisting my words. Am I? This trip is just for the immediate family. That's a direct quote from you. His jaw tightened. You know what I meant. Yes, I do, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. You meant that Jade, Allison, Carson, and Sky are your real family, and I'm… What, exactly? The obligation? The afterthought? That's ridiculous. Of course you're family. But not immediate family. Not family enough to include in vacation planning. Not family enough to be considered automatically, the way the others are. Dad ran a hand through his hair, exasperation written all over his face. Haley, you're a grown woman with your own life. The kids are still at home. It's different. Different, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. It's always been different for me, hasn't it? Different expectations, different levels of support, different rules. Something in my tone must have penetrated his defensive wall because his expression shifted slightly. What are you talking about? The question unleashed a flood of memories and emotions I'd been suppressing for years. I'm talking about how you paid for Allison's condo down payment, but told me I was taking on too much responsibility when I bought my house. I'm talking about Carson's fully funded car while I worked 2 jobs to afford a used Honda in college. I'm talking about how you've never missed a single one of Sky's dance recitals, but couldn't make it to my college graduation because she had a cold. That's not fair, he protested. Those were different circumstances. They always are, I cut in. There's always a reason why they get your time, your money, your attention, and I get whatever's left over, if anything. Dad's face flushed red. I have done everything for you. Everything. Who do you think paid for your braces? Your school trips? Your first car insurance? The bare minimum parental obligations, I said quietly. And even then, you made sure I knew what a burden it was. Meanwhile, you've given the others everything without them having to ask, without making them feel grateful for basic support. This is absurd. You're not being rational. I'm being completely rational. For the first time, I'm seeing things exactly as they are. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. Tell me something, Dad. Have you ever once told me you're proud of me? Of my career? Of my house? Of anything I've accomplished on my own? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly searching for an example. The fact that he had to search at all was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. So that's what this is about? You want praise? A gold star for doing what adults are supposed to do? I shook my head, a sad smile touching my lips. No, Dad. I wanted to be loved the same way you loved them. But I've finally accepted that's never going to happen. The raw honesty hung in the air between us. Dad seemed genuinely taken aback, as if he'd never considered this perspective before. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, we were having a breakthrough. Then his expression hardened again. This is Arlo putting these ideas in your head, isn't it? She's always been a bad influence. And just like that, the moment was gone. No self-reflection, no acknowledgement of my feelings, just deflection and blame. Nobody is putting ideas in my head, I said, gathering my purse and standing up. These are my lived experiences, my feelings. If you can't even consider the possibility that your behavior has hurt me, then there's nothing more to discuss. Sit down, Haley. We're not finished. Yes, we are. I pulled out my wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover both our coffees. I've spent my entire life trying to earn a place in your family. I'm done trying. Don't be dramatic, he snapped. Of course you have a place in the family. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, I've always been the outsider looking in, the child you got stuck with, not the ones you chose. His face went pale. That's not... It is, I said firmly. And you know what the saddest part is? I don't think you even realize you're doing it. It's so automatic for you to prioritize them that you don't even notice when you're pushing me aside. I shouldered my bag, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. Enjoy Lake Tahoe with your family, Dad. I'll be in Portugal, finally doing something for myself instead of waiting for scraps of your attention. Haley. His voice rose as I walked away. Several cafe patrons turned to stare. Don't you dare. Walk away from me. But I did. For the first time in my life, I walked away from my father's anger without apologizing, without trying to make peace, without sacrificing my dignity to smooth things over. Outside, the bright sunshine felt at odds with the storm of emotions inside me. I walked blindly, not heading back toward my office, but just moving, needing the physical motion to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Jade. Your father is very upset. Call him and apologize. I laughed out loud, a slightly hysterical sound that earned me a concerned glance from a passing stranger. Of course, Jade's priority was managing Dad's emotions, not addressing the actual issues I'd raised. Another text, this one from Allison. Way to make Dad's day all about you. Again. That one stung, the unfairness of it taking my breath away. I hadn't sought out this confrontation. I hadn't shown up at Dad's workplace demanding attention. All I'd done was set a boundary, one that apparently the entire family found threatening. Typed out responses to both of them, then deleted the drafts without sending. There was nothing I could say that would make them understand. No magic combination of words that would suddenly make them see the pattern I'd been living with my entire life. Instead, I opened my calendar and scrolled to July 15, 2022, the dates, of both their Lake Tahoe trip and my Portugal adventure. I added a new event spanning the entire week: freedom. Because that's what this was, I realized. Not just a vacation, but liberation from the endless cycle of hoping for inclusion, being disappointed, and blaming myself for expecting too much. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. And despite the emotional exhaustion of the confrontation with my father, despite knowing there would be fallout I hadn't yet experienced, I felt something close to peace. My phone rang. Dad again. I silenced it and kept walking, each step taking me further from the person I had been and closer to the person I was becoming. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who didn't need to beg for a place at the table. Someone who could build her own table if necessary. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that no matter what happened next, I would never go back to being the afterthought, the obligation, the not quite real daughter again. After the confrontation with my father, I took the rest of the day off work. I couldn't focus, couldn't put on the professional face my job required. Instead, I drove to the beach, parked my car, and walked along the shore for hours, letting the rhythmic crash of waves soothe my jangled nerves. By the time I returned home, dusk was settling over Monterey Bay, painting the water in shades of pink and gold. I kicked off my sand-covered shoes at the door and made my way to the kitchen, where I poured a generous glass of wine before heading out to the deck. My phone had been off since I'd left the cafe. Now, sitting in the growing darkness with only the sound of the ocean below, I finally turned it back on. The notifications flooded in immediately. 5 missed calls from Dad, 3 from Jade, 1 from Allison, and several text messages from each of them. I ignored them all, scrolling instead to a name I hadn't contacted in years: Dev, my mother's younger brother. Uncle Dev had been a constant in my life after Mom died, stepping in to help Dad with school pickups, attending my piano recitals, teaching me to drive. But when Dad married Jade, Dev's role had gradually diminished. There had been tension between him and Dad, the specifics of which I'd been too young to fully grasp. By the time I was in high school, Dev's visits had become rare, our communication limited to birthday calls and occasional emails. Before I could overthink it, I tapped his name and initiated a call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Haley, is everything okay?" His voice, warm and familiar despite the years of distance, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Hey, Uncle Dev, everything's—" I paused, considering the automatic fine that usually followed. "Actually, no. Everything's not really okay. What's happening? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I assured him quickly. "It's just Dad stuff." A brief silence. Then, I see. Those 3 words held volumes of understanding. "I know we haven't talked much lately," I continued, "but I could really use some perspective from someone who knew Mom, who knew me before. Everything." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "I'm all ears." I told him everything: the vacation exclusion, the confrontation, the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. Once I started talking, it was like a dam breaking, words pouring out that I hadn't even realized I'd been holding back. Dev listened without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, he sighed deeply. "First of all, I'm sorry, Haley. So sorry that you've been carrying this alone for so long." I thought maybe I was overreacting, I admitted. That I was too sensitive, like Dad always says. You're not overreacting, Dev said firmly. What you're describing is a clear pattern of emotional neglect. It's real, and it's painful, and you have every right to feel hurt by it. The validation from someone who knew both me and my father sent a wave of relief through me so intense I had to grip the deck railing for support. The thing is, Dev continued carefully, I've seen this coming since Phineas married Jade. The way he shifted after your mom died. The way he seemed almost resentful of you sometimes. Resentful? I echoed, confused. Of me? Why? Dev was silent for a long moment. Because you reminded him of Eliza, of what he lost. You have her eyes, her laugh. I think every time he looked at you, he saw her. And for a man who never properly grieved, who rushed into a new relationship barely a year after becoming a widower, that was difficult. The words hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying he's been punishing me all these years because I remind him of Mom? Not consciously, Dev clarified. I don't think Phineas is self-aware enough for that. But subconsciously? Yes, I think that's part of it. And then when the new kids came along, kids who didn't carry that emotional baggage, who represented his fresh start, it became easier to focus on them. I thought about this, turning the idea over in my mind. It made a twisted kind of sense. Dad had never been good with emotional complexity. After Mom died, he'd shut down, throwing himself into work, leaving my day-to-day care largely to neighbors and Mom's friends. When he'd introduced me to Jade just 14 months later, he'd presented it as a done deal. They were getting married. She would be my new mother. Wasn't that wonderful? I'd been 7 years old, still deeply grieving my mother. Jade, to her credit, had tried in the beginning. But she'd been young, unprepared for an instant family that included a heartbroken child. By the time Allison was born, it had been easier for everyone to focus on the new baby, the fresh start, the uncomplicated joy she represented. There's something else you should know, Dev said quietly. Something I've never told you because I didn't want to come between you and your father. But maybe it's time you heard it. A chill ran through me despite the mild evening air. What is it? After Eliza died, she left a trust for you. Not a huge amount, about $50,000, but it was meant for your education, your future. Your mom was always practical that way, planning ahead. I never knew about any trust, I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Because Phineas gained control of it as your guardian. He was supposed to keep it separate for you, but Dev hesitated. When he and Jade bought their house, they needed additional cash for the down payment. He used the trust money, promising he'd pay it back before you went to college. My mind reeled. But he never did. No. By then they had Allison and were struggling with the new mortgage. When I confronted him about it, he said he'd provided a roof over your head, food, clothes, all the basic necessities, and that should count for more than money in a bank account. So that's why you two fell out, I whispered, pieces clicking into place. You were trying to protect my inheritance. I was trying to protect you, Dev corrected gently. The money was secondary. What bothered me was what it represented, a pattern of prioritizing his new family over his obligations to you. When I pushed the issue, he cut me out, limited my access to you. I remembered how Dev's visits had suddenly become less frequent, how Dad would find excuses for why I couldn't go to Uncle Dev's for weekends anymore. At the time, I'd attributed it to Dad wanting me to bond with Jade and baby Allison. Now, I understood the darker truth. I should have fought harder to stay in your life, Dev said, regret heavy in his voice. I've always wondered if I did the right thing by stepping back. You did what you could, I assured him, though part of me ached at the thought of how different things might have been with Dev as a consistent presence in my life. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to understand that what you're experiencing isn't new, and it isn't your fault. It's a pattern that started long ago, and it says everything about Phineas, and nothing about your worth. I wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. Thank you for telling me, for validating what I've been feeling. You deserved to know. And Haley? Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, the career you've built, the home you've made for yourself, completely on your own, without the support you should have had. Eliza would be amazed by your strength. Those words broke something open inside me. I sobbed openly, years of pent-up grief and longing for my mother, washing through me in waves. Dev stayed silent on the line, giving me space to feel it all. When I finally regained my composure, I asked the question that had been lurking at the edges of my consciousness for years. Do you think Dad ever really loved me? Or was I always just an obligation to him? Dev sighed heavily. I think Phineas loved the idea of being a good father more than he was willing to do the actual work of it. When you were a baby, when things were simple, he adored you. After Eliza died, when parenting got complicated and painful, he retreated. And then, when he built his new family, it was easier to focus there, where there wasn't all that grief, tangled up in every interaction. So it wasn't me, I said, the realization spreading through me like a bomb. It was never about me being unlovable or not good enough. God, no, Dev said emphatically. Haley, you were the most wonderful child. Bright, kind, resilient beyond your years. The failure here was entirely your father's, never yours. We talked for another hour, Dev filling in gaps in my childhood, memories, sharing stories about my mother I'd never heard, reconnecting in a way that felt like recovering a piece of myself I'd lost. By the time we said goodbye, with promises to see each other soon, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely lighter. I sat on the deck long after the call ended, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The painful truth Dev had shared explained so much about my relationship with my father, about the pattern of neglect that had defined my place in the family. It wasn't just about the vacation. It wasn't just about the financial disparities between how my father treated me versus my half-siblings. It was about a fundamental failure to love me as I deserved to be loved, to prioritize my needs as a child who had already lost one parent. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of that injustice, not with shame or self-doubt, but with clear-eyed recognition. This wasn't my burden to carry. This wasn't my failure to fix. My phone buzzed with another text from my father. We need to finish our conversation. This behavior is completely unacceptable. I stared at the message, seeing it with new clarity. Always the focus on my behavior, never on his. Always the expectation that I would fall in line, never that he would reflect on his actions. I thought about responding, about trying one more time to make him understand. Then I remembered what Dev had said about patterns established long ago. Some patterns couldn't be broken from just one side. Instead of replying to my father, I pulled up my photos and found a picture I hadn't looked at in years. My mother holding me on my 3rd birthday, both of us laughing as I smeared cake frosting on her cheek. Her eyes, so like mine, crinkled with joy. I wish you were here, Mom, I whispered to the image. I wish you could have seen me grow up. But in a way, she had been with me all along. Her strength lived in me, in my resilience, in my ability to build a life for myself despite the emotional neglect, in my capacity to finally recognize what I deserved. I forwarded the photo to Uncle Dev with a simple message. Thank you for giving me back a piece of her tonight, and a piece of myself. Then I silenced my phone, went inside, and for the first time in years, slept without the weight of trying to earn my place in a family that had never made room for me. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't experienced before. The painful truth about my father's actions, both past and present, no longer felt like a wound I needed to keep hidden. It was simply reality, one I could now face with open eyes. I made coffee and returned to the deck, Watching the morning fog roll across the bay, my phone showed more missed calls and texts from my father and Jade, but also a warm reply from Dev with more photos of my mother he'd dug up from his archives. As I scrolled through them, studying her familiar yet forgotten smile, I made a decision. I would no longer chase my father's approval or acceptance. I would no longer make myself smaller to fit into the corners of his life. I would no longer pretend that the way he treated me was normal or acceptable. It wasn't about cutting him off completely, at least not yet. It was about redrawing the boundaries of our relationship based on the painful truth I now fully acknowledged. My father had failed me in fundamental ways, and no amount of pretending otherwise would change that fact. I opened my laptop and began composing an email, not an emotional plea, but a clear statement of where things stood from my perspective. I would not be joining them in Lake Tahoe. I would not be available for the guilt trips or the gaslighting. I would be focusing on building the life I wanted and nurturing the relationships that added value to it. As I typed the final lines, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The painful truth, once fully faced, had lost some of its power to hurt me. In its place was something stronger: self-knowledge, self-respect, and the freedom that comes from no longer waiting for someone to give you what they've proven, time and again, they're incapable of providing. I clicked send, then closed my laptop. Whatever happened next, I would face it with my eyes open, no longer blinded by the desperate hope that someday, somehow, my father would finally see me. The week following my conversation with Uncle Dev passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. During the day, I threw myself into work with renewed focus, grateful for the distraction. At night, I alternated between moments of liberating clarity and waves of grief for the family relationship I'd always wanted but never truly had. My father's response to my email had been predictably defensive. He accused me of rewriting history and listening to Dev's biased version of events. He neither confirmed nor denied using my trust fund for the family home, a telling omission. Instead, he emphasized everything he'd done for me over the years, the sacrifices he'd made as a single father before Jade came along. There was no acknowledgement of my feelings, no recognition of the pattern I'd described. Jade sent a separate message, her tone gentler but equally dismissive. "We all have different memories of the past," she wrote. "The important thing is to focus on the present and the future. We're family, and families work through their differences." It was the kind of platitude that would have swayed me in the past, the appeal to family unity, the subtle suggestion that holding on to hurt was somehow a failure on my part, rather than a natural response to ongoing mistreatment. Allison sent a brief text. "Dad's really upset about your email. You know how he gets when people bring up Mom." That, too, was revealing. The implicit expectation that I should protect my father from the discomfort of acknowledging his late wife, my mother. As if his emotional comfort should take precedence over my need for honesty and healing. Only Carson reached out with genuine empathy. "I don't understand everything that's happening," he texted, "but I know you wouldn't be this upset without a good reason. I love you, sis." His message brought tears to my eyes. Despite the age gap and the family dynamics working against us, Carson had somehow developed the emotional intelligence to validate my experience without fully knowing the details. On Friday evening, a week after my confrontation with Dad, Arlo came over with takeout and wine. We sat on my deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "So," she said, refilling my glass, "you've had a week to process everything. Where are you at now?" I took a sip of wine, considering the question. "I'm at a crossroads, I think. I can't go back to how things were, pretending everything's fine, accepting less than I deserve. But I'm not sure what moving forward looks like. What are your options?" "I could try again to make them understand," I said, though the words lacked conviction. "Another conversation, another attempt to explain why their treatment hurts. And, based on their responses so far, how likely is that to work?" I sighed. Not very. Dad's incapable of seeing himself as anything other than the hero of every story. And the others, they're so entrenched in the family dynamic, they can't even see it for what it is. So what's option two? I distance myself. Not a dramatic. Cutting off, just less involvement. Fewer attempts to be included. Lower expectations. And option three? Arlo prompted. I looked out at the darkening ocean. I build a different kind of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine care, not biology and obligation. I focus on relationships that add value to my life. You, Uncle Dev, maybe Carson when he's older and can make his own decisions about our relationship. Arlo nodded slowly. That doesn't sound like a crossroads. It sounds like 3 stages of the same path. Her observation struck me as profoundly true. These weren't separate options, but rather a progression, from trying to fix the unfixable, to protecting myself through distance, to actively creating the kind of connection I'd always craved. So what now? I asked, partly to Arlo and partly to myself. Now you decide what kind of relationship you're willing to have with your father and his family, given what you know about their limitations. What can you accept without compromising your self-respect? It was a powerful question, one that made me realize how often I'd sacrificed my dignity in pursuit of their approval. How many times had I swallowed hurtful comments, accepted last minute, cancellations, pretended exclusions didn't hurt, all to maintain a relationship that consistently diminished me? The vacation is 6 weeks away, I mused. That gives me some time to figure things out before the next big family event forces a decision. Arlo raised an eyebrow. Is that what you're doing? Waiting for circumstances to force your hand? The gentle challenge in her voice made me pause. She was right. I was still, in some ways, avoiding making a definitive choice. Still hoping that something external would change the situation so I wouldn't have to take a stand. Old habits, I admitted with a rueful smile. I've spent my whole life reacting to their choices rather than making my own. So, make a choice, Arlo said simply. Not based on what they might do or say, not based on some fantasy of how they might suddenly change, but based on what you know to be true and what you need to be healthy. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. What did I need to be healthy? What choice would honor the truth I now understood about my family? The answer came with surprising clarity. I needed to stop putting myself in situations where my worth was constantly being questioned. I needed to stop showing up for people who consistently showed me I was an afterthought. I needed to invest my emotional energy in relationships that were reciprocal, not extractive. I'm going to Portugal, I said, opening my eyes. I'm going to have an amazing time exploring a new country on my own terms. I'm not going to spend the week checking my phone for messages from them or posting photos designed to make them regret not including me. I'm just going to live my life for myself. And after Portugal? After Portugal, I'm going to maintain relationships with the family members who treat me with respect. Carson, maybe Uncle Dev if we can rebuild that connection. As for Dad, Jade, and the others, I'll be cordial but distant. No more bending. Over backward, no more pretending, no more settling for scraps of attention. The decision, once articulated, felt both terrifying and absolutely right. I wasn't cutting anyone off dramatically, but I was fundamentally changing how I engaged with them, setting boundaries that protected my well-being rather than accommodating their comfort. That sounds healthy, Arlo said, raising her glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, after Arlo had gone home, I sat alone on the deck, listening to the waves crash below. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. We need to put this nonsense behind us before the vacation. Call me tomorrow. The old Haley would have called immediately, eager to smooth things over, willing to accept whatever inadequate resolution he offered just to restore peace. The new Haley, the one standing at the crossroads and finally choosing her own path, simply turned off her phone and went to bed. In the morning, I woke with a sense of quiet determination. I sent a brief reply. I've made my decision. I won't be joining the Lake Tahoe trip, and I won't be discussing it further. I hope you all have a good time. Then I blocked notifications from the family group chat and opened my Portugal itinerary instead, adding a food tour I'd been considering. This trip wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I was finally choosing myself. The decision had been made. I had picked my path. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I had honored my own truth rather than continuing to chase approval I was never going to receive. The crossroads was behind me now. Ahead lay a future I was building on my own terms, brick by brick, choice by choice. Making the decision to prioritize myself was one thing. Actually living it was another entirely. The first real test came the following Sunday, my half-sister Sky's 16th birthday celebration. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, before the vacation drama began. Under normal circumstances, I would have attended without question, bearing an expensive gift and a fixed smile, playing my assigned role as the supportive older sister while swallowing any hurt over the disparities between her elaborate celebration and my own forgotten birthdays. Now, as I stared at the invitation on my refrigerator, I faced my first concrete choice: attend as usual and maintain appearances, or honor. My new boundaries, I chose the latter. I sent Sky a nice birthday text with a digital gift card to her favorite clothing store, then spent the day hiking along the coastal trails near my home instead. No elaborate excuses, no apologies, just a simple choice to do what felt healthy. For me, rather than what the family expected. The fallout was swift. Dad called 3 times that evening. Jade sent a message expressing disappointment that I would punish Sky for adult disagreements. Allison texted that Sky had cried when she realized I wasn't coming. That last one nearly broke my resolve. The thought of hurting Sky, who at 16 was largely innocent of the family dynamics at play, made my stomach clench with guilt. I started composing an apology, then stopped myself, remembering Arlo's words about making choices based on what I needed to be healthy, not on others' reactions. I sent Sky a direct message instead. I hope you had a wonderful birthday celebration. My absence wasn't about you. I'm working through some difficult feelings about family right now. Maybe we could have lunch together next weekend, just the two of us. Her response surprised me. It's fine. Dad said you're just going through a phase because you're jealous of the trip. The casual cruelty of it, and the insight into how my father was framing my feelings to the younger kids, stung sharply. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't escalate the situation or drag Sky further into adult conflicts she wasn't equipped to understand. Work became my sanctuary in the weeks that followed. I threw myself into projects, stayed late at the office, and volunteered for assignments that required my full attention. My colleagues noticed the change. My increased focus, my lack of personal calls during office hours, previously filled with family-related interruptions, my declining of casual, happy hour invitations in favor of heading home to research Portugal or talk with Uncle Dev. Everything okay? My boss, Oliver, asked after a particularly intensive strategy session. You've been, I don't know, different lately. More intense. I'm good, I assured him, just reprioritizing some things in my life. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, it's showing in your work. That Morgan campaign pitch was brilliant. His casual praise meant more than he could know. Straightforward recognition of my professional value without the undertones of criticism I'd grown accustomed to from my family. Simple, unambiguous appreciation. As the Lake Tahoe trip drew closer, communications from my father became more insistent. It seemed my absence had evolved from an inconvenience to a genuine problem for him, not because he particularly wanted me there, but because my refusal to fall in line was disrupting the family narrative he preferred. "Your siblings don't understand why you're acting this way," he texted one evening. "You're creating drama where there doesn't need to be any." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd bent myself into knots trying to avoid creating drama, accepting whatever scraps of inclusion they offered with gratitude rather than complaint. It was only when I stopped accepting the unacceptable that suddenly I was the problem. Uncle Dev became an unexpected but welcome ally during this period. We spoke weekly, rebuilding our relationship with a new honesty that felt healing for both of us. He shared stories about my mother I'd never heard, filled in gaps in my childhood memories, and validated the difficult emotions I was working through. "Your mom faced similar struggles with your dad," he told me during one of our calls. Even when they were married, Phineas had a way of making her feel like she was asking for too much whenever she expressed a need. It's a pattern with him. This revelation both saddened and comforted me. Sad to know my mother had experienced the same emotional diminishment I had, but comforting to have further confirmation that the problem wasn't my perception or sensitivity. 3 weeks before the Tahoe trip and my Portugal adventure, Carson reached out with an unexpected request. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" he texted. "Just need some space from everyone here." At 17, Carson was in that liminal space between childhood and adulthood, increasingly aware of family dynamics but still largely subject to parental authority. His request surprised me. Dad and Jade rarely allowed the kids to stay with me overnight, let alone for a few days. "Everything okay?" I replied. "Just tired of the drama. Dad's been on edge ever since your fight. Keeps talking about you to anyone who'll listen." I winced, imagining my father's version of events being repeatedly aired to extended family, neighbors, perhaps even the kids' friends' parents. It was a pattern I recognized. My father positioning himself as the reasonable, long-suffering parent while painting me as emotional, ungrateful, difficult. "Have you asked Dad and Jade if it's okay for you to visit?" I asked. "Not yet. Wanted to check with you first." I hesitated. On one hand, I wanted to support Carson and strengthen our relationship. On the other, I didn't want to be accused of trying to steal him away or influence him against the rest of the family. "I'd love to have you visit," I wrote carefully. "But I don't want to cause more tension. Maybe suggest it as a chance to see the ocean before summer ends." Carson agreed to the approach. To my surprise, Dad and Jade consented to the visit, perhaps seeing it as an opportunity to enlist Carson as a mediator. The weekend Carson came to stay marked my first real taste of family connection without the constant undercurrent of tension. We spent Saturday exploring the tide pools along the coast, grabbing fish tacos from my favorite beachside stand, and watching bad action movies on my living room couch. No agenda, no power dynamics, just genuine enjoyment of each other's company. "This is nice," Carson said as we sat on the deck that evening watching the sunset. "Peaceful." I glanced at him, struck by the maturity in his young face. "It is peaceful. That's what I've been trying to create more of in my life." He nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. Things at home are always so, I don't know, high pressure? Dad's always got some issue he's worked up about. Jade's always scheduling and organizing and making sure everyone's where they're supposed to be. Allison's drama with whatever boyfriend she's fighting with. Sky's constant social media crisis of the day. And you're the peacekeeper," I observed gently. He looked surprised, then smiled ruefully. "Yeah, I guess I am. Never really thought about it that way." "I was too at your age," I told him. "Always trying to smooth things over, keep everyone happy, not rock the boat. Does that ever get, I don't know, exhausting?" The simple question, asked with such genuine curiosity, caught me off guard. "Yes," I admitted. "Eventually it does. That's sort of what this whole situation is about for me. realizing I can't keep everyone happy at the expense of my own well-being. Carson was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then he asked, "Are you really not coming to Tahoe at all?" "I'm really not," I confirmed. "I've booked a trip to Portugal instead." "That sounds way cooler than Tahoe," he said with a grin. "Though, don't tell Dad I said that." I laughed, feeling a genuine bond with my half-brother that transcended the complications of our family situation. "Your secret's safe with me." When I drove Carson home on Sunday evening, Dad was waiting on the front porch, his expression carefully neutral. I stayed in the car, waving as Carson grabbed his backpack from the trunk. "You're not coming in?" Carson asked through my open window. "Not today," I said, with a smile I hoped concealed the anxiety bubbling in my stomach. "I've got some work to finish up." The truth was, I wasn't ready to test my new boundaries in Dad's territory. My home had become a safe space where I could practice being the person I wanted to be. Outside of it, particularly in the family home where old patterns were so deeply entrenched, I wasn't yet confident in my ability to maintain that sense of self. As I drove away, I caught sight of Dad in my rearview mirror, still standing on the porch, watching me go. There was something in his posture, a stiffness, perhaps a dawning realization that this time was different. That I wasn't going to break and come running back as I always had before. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. My first real step into the unknown territory of being Haley on my own terms, not Dad's daughter on his. 2 weeks before, the scheduled vacations, mine to Portugal, theirs to Lake Tahoe, Dad escalated his efforts to bring me back into the fold. Not because he wanted to make amends, I suspected, but because my continued resistance was undermining his preferred narrative about our family. It began with a surprise visit to my office. I was in the middle of a client meeting when my assistant, Ben, poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but your father is in the lobby. Says it's important." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Please tell him I'm in meetings all afternoon. I can call him later." Ben nodded and disappeared. 10 minutes later, he was back. He's insisting on waiting. Says he'll stay all day if necessary. Typical Dad, using inconvenience and social pressure to force compliance. I knew if I didn't see him, he'd create a scene that would reflect poorly on me professionally. With an apologetic smile to my clients, I excused myself for 5 minutes. Dad was pacing the lobby, his expression a careful blend of concern and determination, a look I recognized from countless childhood confrontations. The "I'm only doing this because I care" face that preceded unwanted interventions. "Dad, I'm in the middle of an important meeting," I said quietly. "I can't talk now." "This is ridiculous, Haley. We're family. You can't just shut me out because you're upset about a vacation." Several colleagues glanced our way, clearly curious about the tension. I motioned toward the small conference room near the entrance. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you right now." Once inside with the door closed, I crossed my arms. "What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for a phone call?" "Your behavior is affecting the entire family," he said without preamble. "Sky thinks you hate her because you missed her birthday. Carson came back from your place with all sorts of ideas about peace and boundaries. Allison says you're ignoring her texts. Jade is stressed about the vacation because everyone keeps asking if you're coming." "And how is any of that my responsibility?" I asked calmly. He blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "You're the one causing the problems." "No, Dad. I'm the one refusing to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. There's a difference." "Look," he said, his tone shifting to one of forced reasonableness. "Whatever issues you think we have, we can work them out. But first, you need to stop this. Rebellion." The word choice was revealing. In his mind, my asserting boundaries was an act of rebellion, not an adult making a legitimate choice. This isn't rebellion, I said firmly. This is me making decisions about my own life. I'm not coming to Lake Tahoe. I'm going to Portugal. That decision is final. You're being selfish, he snapped, the reasonable facade cracking. Thinking only about yourself instead of what's best for the family. The accusation was so ironic. I almost laughed. Interesting perspective from someone who told me I wasn't part of the immediate family. You're twisting my words again. No, I'm quoting them exactly. And I need to get back to my meeting now. I turned to leave, but he caught my arm. Haley, don't walk away from me. We're not finished. The touch, the command, the assumption that he had the right to dictate when our conversation ended, it crystallized everything that was wrong with our relationship. I gently but firmly removed his hand. Yes, we are finished. At least for today. I have clients waiting. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, voice rising. You prioritize everything else above family. The irony was too rich to let pass. I learned that from watching you, Dad. His face flushed red. Before he could respond, I opened the conference room door. I need to get back to work now. Please don't show up at my office unannounced again. I walked away, heart pounding, but head high. Behind me, I heard him call out, "This isn't over, Haley." But in many ways, it was. That confrontation at my workplace, a space where I had built a successful career entirely on my own merits, marked a turning point. I was no longer just emotionally detaching from my family's dysfunctional patterns. I was actively enforcing boundaries against them. That evening, I wrote an email to my entire family, Dad, Jade, Allison, Sky, and Carson. I want to be clear about where things stand going forward. I will not be joining the Lake Tahoe trip. I will not be discussing this decision further, so please stop trying to change my mind or make me feel guilty about it. I need space to process some difficult realizations about our family dynamics. This doesn't mean I don't care about you. It means I'm finally caring about myself as well. For the immediate future, I would appreciate no surprise visits to my home or workplace. 2. Respect for my decision not to attend certain family events. 3. An understanding that I will respond to messages when I'm ready. Not on demand, I'm not cutting anyone off, but I am changing how I engage with the family. I hope in time we can build healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Haley. After sending it, I blocked notifications from the family group chat and turned my phone to Do Not Disturb. Whatever tsunami of reactions was coming, I didn't need to weather it in real time. The next morning, I woke to 17 text messages, 5 missed calls, and 3 voicemails. I didn't read or listen to any of them. Instead, I drove to a small cafe in a neighboring town, one my family never visited, and spent the morning reading a guidebook about Portugal while enjoying the simple pleasure of uninterrupted solitude. My phone buzzed with a direct text from Carson. I respect your boundaries. Still cool if I text sometimes? His maturity brought tears to my eyes. Always cool if you text, I replied. You're not the problem, Carson. Never think that. Over the next few days, I systematically reinforced the boundaries I'd established. I created email filters that sent family messages to a separate folder I could check when I felt emotionally equipped to handle them. I adjusted my social media settings to limit what certain family members could see. I informed the security desk at my apartment building that I wasn't accepting unannounced visitors, even family. These practical steps felt both necessary and liberating. For the first time, I was creating actual, tangible barriers to protect my emotional well-being, not just making internal resolutions that crumbled at the first sign of family pressure. The most difficult boundary to establish involved my beach house. From the moment I purchased it, my family had treated it as a communal resource. Allison bringing friends for weekend stays without asking. Dad and Jade borrowing it for anniversaries. everyone assuming they had standing permission to use it whenever they wanted. I'd never minded before, viewing their use of my home as proof that I had something valuable to contribute to the family. Now, I recognized it as yet another one-way street. They freely used my resources while rarely sharing theirs with me. So I contacted the property management company that maintained the house when I wasn't there and updated my authorization list. Going forward, no one would be given keys without my explicit written permission for specific dates. It was a small change that represented an enormous shift in my thinking. I was no longer making myself and my resources endlessly available in hopes of earning the love and inclusion I craved. I was recognizing my own value and requiring others to respect it too. Drawing these lines wasn't easy. Each boundary I set was accompanied by waves of guilt and anxiety, the ingrained fear that by protecting myself, I was somehow being selfish or cruel. Uncle Dev helped me navigate these feelings, reminding me that healthy boundaries weren't about punishment, but about creating space for healthier relationships to potentially grow. Think of it like pruning a plant, he said during one of our calls. You're cutting back the unhealthy growth patterns to allow for new, stronger ones to develop. It seems harsh in the moment, but it's actually an act of care for yourself and ultimately for the relationship. A week before my Portugal trip, I received a text from Jade that made it clear my boundary setting was having an impact, though not necessarily the one I'd hoped for. Phineas is extremely hurt by your email and your refusal to answer his calls. As your stepmother for most of your life, I'm asking you to consider how your actions are affecting everyone, not just yourself. Family should come first. I stared at the message for a long time, recognizing the emotional manipulation embedded in every line. The appeal to my father's feelings without acknowledgement of mine. The invocation of her role as my stepmother to establish authority. The suggestion that prioritizing my own well-being was somehow selfish, while their disregard for my feelings was not. In the past, a message like this would have sent me spiraling into guilt and self-doubt. Now, I simply noted the tactics and did not respond. The line had been drawn. I was finally standing firmly on my side of it. The week before my departure for Portugal brought an escalation in my family's attempts to break through the boundaries I'd established. It was as if they sensed that I was serious this time, that this wasn't the temporary withdrawal they'd seen from me in the past, easily reversed with enough pressure or guilt. First came the flying monkeys, those unwitting or willing messengers deployed to make me question my stance. My father's sister, Aunt Garnet, called out of the blue. "Haley, honey, your father is beside himself," she said without preamble. "He says you're refusing to speak to the family and that you've canceled on the Lake Tahoe trip last minute." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that she was only hearing one carefully edited version of events. "That's not quite accurate, Aunt Garnet. I was explicitly told the trip was for immediate family only. When I pointed out that I am also family, I was dismissed. So I made other plans." "Oh." Her voice faltered. "Well, you know your father. He sometimes speaks without thinking. He didn't mean to exclude you." "He did mean it," I said gently but firmly. "And that's okay. He's entitled to plan whatever vacation he wants with whomever he wants. I'm just not pretending anymore that it doesn't hurt to be left out." "But sweetie, families have disagreements all the time. You can't just run off to, where are you going again? Portugal. And I'm not running from anything. I'm choosing to spend my vacation time in a way that brings me joy rather than stress." She made a few more attempts to persuade me before finally sighing. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. Your father says the whole family is upset about this." Sure they are," I replied neutrally. Change is often uncomfortable, but this is the right decision for me right now. After Aunt Garnet came my father's longtime friend Garrett, who happened to run into me at my local coffee shop, a place he'd never frequented before. "Phineas is worried about you," he said, sliding uninvited into the chair across from me. "Says you've been acting out of character." I closed my laptop, accepting that my peaceful morning work session was over. I'm fine, Garrett, and I doubt my father sent you to check on my well-being. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Well, he did mention you're missing the family vacation. Seems like a shame when everyone will be there. Not everyone, I pointed out. Just the people he considers immediate family. Garrett winced. He told you that? Sounds like Phineas put his foot in his mouth again. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a clear articulation of how he sees me in relation to his real family. Come on, Haley. You know he doesn't think of you that way. Actually, I do know that's exactly how he thinks of me. I've just spent many years pretending otherwise. The conversation circled uncomfortably before Garrett finally gave up. As he was leaving, he turned back with one parting shot. Your father says you've blocked the family from using your beach house. Seems a bit petty, doesn't it? I felt heat rise to my face. Interesting that he's more concerned about access to my property than about repairing our relationship. As the week progressed, the pressure tactics escalated. Jade sent a carefully worded email about how Sky was crying herself to sleep over my abandonment. Allison left a voicemail suggesting I was having some kind of breakdown and should get help. Even my father's mother, who rarely involved herself in family disputes, sent a text expressing deep disappointment in my selfish behavior. The most difficult pushback came from an unexpected source. 3 days before my Portugal trip, Carson called, his voice tight with distress. Dad says if you don't come to Lake Tahoe, I can't go to that music camp in August, he said without greeting. He says the money has to go toward fixing things around the house instead. My heart sank. The summer music program was something Carson had been looking forward to for months, a prestigious 2-week camp for gifted young composers, which he'd worked hard to be accepted into. That's not fair to you, Carson. This isn't your issue. Can. You just come for a few days, he pleaded. Even just the weekend? Then everything can go back to normal. The naked manipulation infuriated me. My father was using Carson as a pawn, punishing him to pressure me into compliance. It was a new low, even for him. Let me think about this, I told Carson. I'll call you back. After hanging up, I paced my living room, struggling with a tangle of emotions, rage at my father's tactics, guilt over Carson's predicament, and the creeping fear that maybe I was being selfish after all. Was standing my ground worth the cost to someone I cared about? I called Uncle Dev for perspective. He's using Carson to manipulate you, Dev confirmed after I explained the situation. If you give in now, you're teaching your father that this tactic works. He'll use it again and again. But what about Carson? It's not fair for him to suffer because of my choices. Dev was quiet for a moment. What if you paid for Carson's music camp yourself? Would that be financially feasible for you? I considered. And the camp wasn't cheap, about $2,800 for the 2 weeks, but I could afford it. Yes, I could do that, but should I? Am I overstepping by doing this behind my father's back? Haley, your father has already made this your business by using Carson's opportunity as leverage against you. You're not overstepping. You're refusing to let an innocent kid be collateral damage in an adult conflict. The clarity of his perspective steadied me. I called Carson back and made him an offer. I would pay for his music camp directly, regardless of whether I came to Lake Tahoe or not. Really? His voice brightened immediately. You'd do that? Of course I would. Your talent deserves to be nurtured, and this camp is important for your future. This conflict between Dad and me shouldn't affect your opportunities. Carson's relief was palpable, but also tinged with worry. What do I tell Dad? Tell him the truth, that I'm covering the cost of camp so it's no longer a financial concern for him. He can be angry with me about it if he wants, but at least you'll still get to go. After we hung up, I immediately went online and paid the camp fees in full, then forwarded the receipt to Carson with a note. No one can take this away from you. Now, I believe in your talent and your future. I expected my father's reaction to be swift and furious. What I didn't expect was the complete silence that followed. No angry call. No blistering text. Nothing. The silence was more unnerving than any confrontation would have been. It suggested calculation rather than impulse, a strategic retreat rather than surrender. 2 days before my Portugal departure, I learned why. Jade called, not texted, not emailed, but actually placed a voice call, something she rarely did. "Haley, I'm calling about the beach house," she said, her tone carefully pleasant. "We need to use it the week after Lake Tahoe." I nearly dropped the phone in surprise. After everything that had happened, after all the accusations and manipulations, they were asking to use my property? "The beach house isn't available," I said once I'd recovered my composure. "Why would you need it anyway? Won't you be tired of vacation after a week at the lake?" Jade's pleasant tone slipped slightly. "Your father has some important clients coming to town. He promised them an oceanfront experience. Your house would be perfect." The audacity was breathtaking. My father, who had explicitly excluded me from the family vacation, who had attempted to use Carson's future as leverage against me, now wanted access to my home for his business purposes. "No," I said simply. "No?" She sounded genuinely shocked. "But you've always let us use the house before." "Things have changed." "This is important for your father's business, Haley. These clients could mean a huge commission. You know how much the family relies on those." The irony of her using the word family wasn't lost on me. "The beach house isn't available," I repeated. "You'll need to make other arrangements." "This is because of the Tahoe trip, isn't it?" Her voice hardened. "You're punishing your father because your feelings got hurt." "This isn't punishment, Jade. This is consequence. Dad made it clear I'm not part of the immediate family. I'm simply adjusting my behavior to match that reality. My resources aren't automatically available to people who don't consider me family when it's convenient for them." "That is the most childish—" "I have to go," I interrupted. "I'm packing for Portugal. I hope you find suitable accommodations for Dad's clients." I ended the call before she could respond, then immediately shut off my phone. I'd expected to feel guilty or anxious after refusing their request, but instead, I felt a surprising sense of calm. My boundaries were holding. I was no longer allowing myself to be used when it was convenient while being excluded when it wasn't. The why. Next day, as I finished my packing and prepared for my early morning flight, I received a text from an unknown number. It turned out to be from Sky, using a friend's phone since I'd muted the family group chat. "Dad says you're being selfish about the beach house, but Carson told me what happened with the music camp. I don't think you're selfish. I think you're brave." Her unexpected support brought tears to my eyes. 16-year-old Sky, seeing through the family narrative with more clarity than many of the adults. "Thank you, Sky," I texted back. "That means more than you know." As I zipped my suitcase closed that night, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: pride in my newfound strength, sadness for the family relationships that might never be what I'd hoped, and a tentative excitement for the journey ahead, both the literal one to Portugal and the figurative one toward a more authentic life. The pushback had been intense, as I'd expected. But unlike every other time in my life, I hadn't crumbled under the pressure. I hadn't sacrificed my needs for their comfort. I hadn't accepted less than I deserved in exchange for conditional inclusion. I was still standing. And in the morning, I would be flying. Not away from my problems, but toward a new understanding of what family could and should be. The morning of my departure for Portugal arrived with a crystalline clarity that seemed fitting for this new chapter in my life. As my rideshare driver loaded my suitcase into the trunk, I took one last look at my home, the sanctuary I'd built for myself, by myself, and felt a surge of pride. Whatever happened with my family, I had this. I had created something solid and beautiful through my own efforts. The drive to the airport was peaceful, the pre-dawn roads nearly empty. My phone remained blissfully silent. Either my family had finally accepted my boundaries, or more likely, they were regrouping for the next assault. Either way, I had this moment of calm, this interlude before whatever came next. As we merged onto the highway, my mind drifted to another journey I'd taken years ago, one that held strange parallels to my current situation. I was 23, fresh out of college, and had just accepted my first real job at a small marketing firm in Seattle, a position that would take me away from my hometown and my family for the first time. Dad had been furious. "Seattle? That's a 5-hour drive. What's wrong with the firms here?" "The opportunity is better there," I'd explained, trying to contain my excitement about the offer. "And it's a chance to experience living in a different city. This is about getting away from family, isn't it?" He'd fixed me with an accusatory stare. "From your responsibilities here." I had no responsibilities at home beyond the weekly family dinners my father insisted upon. Allison was in high school, Carson was 12, and Sky was 9, all well past the ages where they needed constant supervision. But in my father's mind, my presence was required, not for practical help, but for the family image he carefully maintained. "It's about starting my career," I'd insisted. "This is a great opportunity." Dad had launched into a litany of reasons why moving was selfish, impractical, and unnecessary. Jade had backed him up, suggesting I was running away rather than working through family issues. Even teenage Allison had piled on, asking dramatically who would help her prepare for college if I left. For weeks, the pressure had been relentless. Every family gathering became an intervention. Every phone call turned into a guilt trip. Dad enlisted relatives, family friends, even my former high school teachers to talk sense into me. The parallels to my current situation were striking. Then, as now, my desire for independence was framed as betrayal. My pursuit of my own path was cast as abandonment of family. My boundaries were interpreted as selfishness. But there was one crucial difference. Back then, I had eventually given in. After a month of constant pressure, I had called the Seattle firm and declined their offer, accepting instead a lower-paying position at a local agency where my father had connections. I had surrendered my dream of independence in exchange for family approval. I had prioritized their comfort over my own growth, and what had it gotten me? 3 years in a dead-end job where I was the boss's friend's daughter, rather than a valued employee based on my own merits. 3 more years living in my father's shadow, my decisions scrutinized, my independence curtailed. 3 years of weekly family dinners where I sat silently as Dad dominated the conversation, Jade managed everyone's behavior, and my half-siblings absorbed the unspoken message that my needs were secondary to the family's expectations. It had taken another 2 years after that to finally break free, to find a job in Monterey and move there despite my father's objections. By then, I was 28, having lost 5 crucial early career years to familial obligation. 5 years I could never get back. As the airport came into view, I made a silent promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I sacrifice my well-being for approval that was always conditional, always just out of reach. Never again would I shrink myself to fit into the narrow space my family allocated to me. At the terminal, I checked my bag and made my way through security, feeling lighter with each step. My Portugal adventure awaited. 10 days of exploration, beauty, and freedom. 10 days of being answerable only to myself and my own desires. Just before boarding, I turned my phone back, on to download my entertainment for the flight. A text from Dad appeared immediately. "Your refusal to let us use the beach house is childish and hurtful. We'll discuss this when you return." In the past, a message like this would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and guilt. I would have spent the entire flight rehearsing explanations and apologies, strategizing how to make peace without completely surrendering my position. The ghost of that anxious, people-pleasing Haley whispered that maybe I should reconsider. That family harmony was worth any price. But now I recognized that voice for what it was. The echo of old patterns. The residue of years spent being trained to put others' needs before my own. With calm deliberation, I deleted the message without responding and turned my phone to airplane mode. As the plane taxied down the runway, another memory surfaced. This one, older, hazier, from the months after my mother died. I was 6, still, shell-shocked from her absence, and had been invited to a classmate's birthday party. I'd been excited about it for days, clinging to this normal childhood event amid the chaos of grief. On the morning of the party, Dad had announced we couldn't go. "Something's come up at work," he'd said distractedly. "We'll have to skip it," I'd cried, heartbroken at missing the rare opportunity for joy in that dark time. "But I really want to go," I'd sobbed. "Please, Daddy." His response had been swift and cutting. "The world doesn't revolve around what you want, Haley. Sometimes we have to put other things first." That message, that my wants were inherently less important, that sacrifice was expected of me but not of him, had been reinforced countless times over the years. When I wanted to attend a summer arts program but Dad scheduled a family vacation during the same weeks. When I was accepted to my dream college but pressured to attend a local university instead. When I received a job offer abroad but was made to feel that even considering it was a betrayal. Again and again, the pattern repeated. My desires, my opportunities, my growth were secondary to family convenience and my father's comfort. It had become so ingrained that for years I didn't even question it. I simply accepted that this was my role, to accommodate, to acquiesce, to put myself last. But as the plane lifted off, carrying me away from the weight of those old expectations, I felt something long dormant unfurling within me. Hope. Hope that I could break these generational patterns. Hope that I could create a life defined by my own choices, rather than my father's expectations. Hope that I could build relationships based on mutual respect, rather than obligation and guilt. The past would always be part of me. Those echoes would never completely fade, but they no longer had to dictate my future. Like the airplane gaining altitude, I was rising above the limitations that had kept me tethered for so long. Portugal wasn't just a vacation. It was a declaration of independence. A statement that the pattern stopped here, with me, now. As the California coastline disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds, I closed my eyes and let go of the anxiety that had been my constant companion in family matters. Whatever awaited me upon my return, more pushback, more guilt trips, more manipulation, I would face it with the strength of someone who knew her worth. The echoes of the past might still whisper, but they no longer controlled me. I was writing a new story now, one where I was the author rather than a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Portugal was everything I'd hoped for and more. The vibrant tiles of Porto, the rolling vineyards of the Douro Valley, the historic charm of Lisbon. Each day brought new discoveries and quiet joys. I posted occasional photos to my personal social media, but deliberately avoided checking any family-related messages or the family group chat. This vacation wasn't about proving anything to them or making them regret excluding me. It was about reconnecting with myself, rediscovering what brought me joy, without the constant filter of family approval. On my 4th day in Porto, sitting at a small cafe overlooking the Douro River, I received an unexpected email from my stepmother's sister, Arlo. She and I had always been cordial but never particularly close, our interactions limited to occasional exchanges at larger family gatherings. "Haley, I hope you're enjoying Portugal. It looks amazing from your photos. I wanted to reach out because I've been hearing Jade and Phineas's version of what's happening with the family, and frankly, it doesn't sit right with me. You may not know this, but my relationship with Jade has always been complicated. As the younger sister, I've often been cast in a similar role to what you've described experiencing in your family. The less important one, the afterthought. When she married your father and suddenly had a ready-made family plus new babies on. The way our already unbalanced relationship shifted even further. My life choices. Remaining single, focusing on my career, not having children, were subtly denigrated against the backdrop of her perfect family. All this to say, I recognize the dynamics you're pushing back against. I understand why you've drawn these boundaries. And while I would never say this to Jade directly, family peace and all that, I want you to know that I think you're incredibly brave. I'm sorry you've had to fight so hard for basic respect and inclusion. If you ever want to talk to someone who understands the complexities of being the wrong kind of family member in Jade's orbit, I'm here. Enjoy Portugal. From what I can see, you've built a beautiful life for yourself. Arlo. I read the email twice, tears welling in my eyes. The validation from such an unexpected source, someone from Jade's side of the family, someone who had witnessed the dynamics from a different angle but reached the same conclusions, was powerfully affirming. I wrote back immediately, thanking Arlo for her support and sharing a bit more about my Portugal adventures. By the end of the day, we'd exchanged several more messages, finding surprising common ground in our experiences with the family hierarchy. Arlo's outreach was just the first of several unexpected allies who emerged during my time away. On day 6, as I explored the historic Alfama district in Lisbon, I received a text from my father's administrative assistant, Sky, no relation to my half-sister, a woman who had worked for him for over 15 years and whom I'd always liked but never really known well. Hope it's okay to message you directly. Your dad asked me to research alternative accommodations for some clients since plans changed with his beach house. Just wanted you to know he's been bad-mouthing you around the office, saying you're going through some kind of crisis. Several of us who've worked with him for years can read between the lines. Whatever's happening, stay strong. Some of us see more than he realizes. The message stunned me. I'd always assumed my father's professional persona was different from how he behaved at home, more controlled, more reasonable. The idea that his colleagues had witnessed enough of his behavior to read between the lines of the current situation was both validating and slightly embarrassing. I sent a brief thank you to Sky, appreciating her risk in reaching out, but not wanting to put her in an awkward position by sharing too many details. The most surprising ally emerged the day before I was set to return home. I was having dinner at a small restaurant near my hotel when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Haley? It's Jade's mother, Maureen. My heart sank. Maureen and I had always had a strained relationship at best. As Jade's mother, she had entered my life when I was 7, positioning herself as a grandmother figure while subtly reinforcing the message that I wasn't quite as important as her real grandchildren. Hello, Maureen, I said cautiously. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, she assured me quickly. I'm calling because, well, this is difficult for me to say, but I owe you an apology. Of all the things I'd expected her to say, an apology wasn't even on the list. An apology? Yes. She took an audible breath. I've not been fair to you over the years. When Jade married your father, I was so excited about being a grandmother that I didn't stop to consider what you had lost. Your mother was gone, and instead of being an additional source of love and support in your life, I focused entirely on the new babies when they came along. I sat in stunned silence as she continued. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I think I viewed you as competition, in a way. For Jade's attention, for Phineas's resources, you were a reminder of his previous life, previous commitments. So I participated in pushing you to the margins of the family, treating you as less deserving of attention and care. It was wrong of me, and I'm truly sorry. What, what brought this on? I finally managed to ask. Believe it or not, it was something Carson said. Her voice softened. He called me last week, very upset about this whole vacation situation. He said something that struck me deeply, that you were the only person in the family who treated him like an individual rather than an extension of his parents. That made me reflect on how I've treated you all these years, and I didn't like what I saw. The thought of 17-year-old Carson standing up for me to his grandmother, risking disapproval to speak truth about family dynamics, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I appreciate you saying this, Maureen. It means a lot. I know. An apology doesn't erase years of behavior, she acknowledged. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, and I respect the boundaries you're setting, even if Jade and Phineas don't understand them yet. After we hung up, I sat at my table long after my meal was finished, processing this unexpected conversation. Maureen's apology couldn't undo the past, but it represented something I'd never truly experienced from my father's side of the family. Accountability. The simple acknowledgement that their treatment of me had been unfair and hurtful felt revolutionary. That night, as I packed for my return journey, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few short weeks. By standing firm in my truth, by refusing to accept the unacceptable any longer, I had not only begun healing myself, but had somehow created space for others to reflect on their own roles in the family dynamic. Arlo, Office Sky, Maureen, 3. People who had witnessed the patterns from different vantage points and had independently reached similar conclusions about the unfairness of my position. Their support didn't erase the hurt or magically fix the deeper issues with my father and Jade, but it reassured me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't too sensitive, that what I had experienced was real and valid. As I zipped my suitcase closed, I realized something important. I was not alone. The narrative my father had tried to establish, that I was the problem, that I was being selfish and unreasonable, hadn't convinced everyone. There were people who saw through it, who recognized the truth even when it wasn't convenient or comfortable. For someone who had spent most of her life feeling isolated within her own family, this realization was profoundly healing. I might be returning to face more conflict, more pushback, more attempts to bring me back into the old patterns, but I would be doing so with the knowledge that others stood with me, even if silently or from a distance. The unexpected allies had given me something beyond validation. They had given me hope that change was possible, that speaking truth could create ripples beyond my own immediate experience, that perhaps, in time, different kinds of relationships could emerge from the ashes of the old ones. I fell asleep that night with a sense of peace I hadn't expected to find on this journey. Portugal had given me beauty, adventure, and self-discovery. But these unexpected connections had given me something equally valuable, the knowledge that I wasn't fighting alone. Returning home from Portugal felt like stepping between worlds. For 10 days, I had existed in a space of my own making, free from family expectations and old patterns. Now, as my plane touched down in California, reality awaited, along with whatever fallout had accumulated during my absence. I turned on my phone as soon as we landed, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage of messages. To my surprise, there were only a few notifications from my family, a text from Carson asking when I'd be back, a surprisingly civil email from Jade about some mail that had arrived for me at their house, and nothing at all from my father. Relative silence was more unnerving than an onslaught would have been. It suggested calculation rather than impulse, strategy rather than emotion. After collecting my luggage and catching a rideshare home, I spent the evening unpacking, doing laundry, and gradually reacclimating to my regular life. I posted a final set of Portugal photos to social media, sent thank you messages to the unexpected allies who had reached out during my trip, and prepared for my return to work the following day. It wasn't until I checked my work email that I discovered the new challenge awaiting me. Subject: Martinez Family Enterprises, potential new client from Oliver Wright, CEO. Haley, hope you had a great vacation. While you were away, we received an interesting new business inquiry that I think you should handle personally. Martinez Family Enterprises is looking to rebrand their real estate division and expand their digital marketing strategy. Given your expertise in both areas, you're the natural choice to lead this account. Their CEO, Phineas Martinez, specifically requested to work with our top talent. I assured him that's exactly what he'd get with you on the project. Let's discuss details when you're back in the office tomorrow. Oliver. I stared at the screen, blood rushing in my ears. My father had done the unthinkable. He had deliberately entangled our professional worlds, creating a situation where I would be forced to either work with him directly or explain to my boss why I couldn't. It was a masterful power play. If I refused the assignment, I would appear unprofessional and potentially damage my standing at the company. If I accepted it, I would be right back in the dynamic I had been trying to escape. My father exercising control over my time, my attention, my professional reputation. The calculated nature of it left me breathless. He must have researched my company, reached out while I was away to ensure I couldn't intervene, and positioned the opportunity in a way my boss couldn't refuse. All to force me back into orbit around him on his terms. I closed my laptop and walked out to the deck, needing the open air to think clearly. The ocean stretched before me, dark and vast in the night. The rhythmic crash of waves usually soothing but now barely registering through my churning thoughts. What were my options? I could accept the assignment and try to maintain professional boundaries, though history suggested that would be nearly impossible with my father involved. I could refuse it and risk my professional standing. I could go to Oliver with a partial explanation of the conflict of interest, though that would mean bringing personal issues into my workplace, something I had always strenuously avoided. None of the options felt good. Each carried significant potential costs, either to my hard-won boundaries or to my career. I slept poorly that night, waking repeatedly to consider and reconsider my approach. By morning, I had settled on a strategy. Not a perfect one, but the best I could devise under the circumstances. At the office, I requested a private meeting with Oliver before the day's scheduled activities began. "Welcome back," he greeted me warmly. "Portugal looks amazing from your photos. Ready to dive into the Martinez project? It could be a significant account for us." "About that," I said carefully, "I need to disclose something important. Phineas Martinez is my father." Oliver's eyebrows shot up. "Your father? Why didn't you mention this before?" "We're not close," I explained, keeping my tone neutral. "And I've always been careful to maintain separation between my personal and professional lives." "I see," Oliver said, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely. "Well, this could actually be an advantage. Inside knowledge of the company, family connection to the CEO." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "it presents some complications. There's a reason I've kept my professional and family lives separate. The dynamic between my father and me can be challenging." Oliver leaned back in his chair, studying me. In the 5 years I'd worked for him, I had never brought personal issues into our professional relationship. My disclosure now clearly signaled the seriousness of the situation. "Tell me what you're comfortable sharing," he said finally. I took a deep breath. "My father and I have different perspectives on appropriate boundaries. He tends to blur lines in ways that can become problematic. I'm concerned that if I lead this account, those issues will affect my ability to serve the client effectively." "You think he sought out our company specifically because you work here?" "I'm certain of it," I said. "And not because he wants to support my career." Oliver was quiet for a moment, processing this. Would you feel comfortable working on the account if you weren't the lead? Perhaps in a supporting role with less direct client contact? It was a reasonable compromise, one that would preserve my professional standing while creating some buffer between my father and me. But something in me rebelled at the thought of any involvement, any crack in the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. I need to be completely honest, I said slowly. I believe my father pursued this relationship with our company as a way to regain access to me after I've established some necessary distance. If I participate in the project, in any capacity, it validates that tactic. Oliver's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Haley, is there something more serious going on that I should be aware of? As your employer, I need to know if there's a situation that could affect your safety or well-being at work. It's nothing like that, I assured him quickly. Just a power struggle, I suppose. For years, I've allowed family dynamics to dictate terms in my life. Recently, I've started setting healthier boundaries. This feels like an attempt to circumvent those boundaries by bringing the conflict into my professional space. Understanding dawned in Oliver's eyes. I see. And by declining to work with him in any capacity, you're maintaining those boundaries. Yes. Exactly. He nodded thoughtfully. Family business can be complicated. I once refused to work with my brother-in-law's company for similar reasons. He tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking, here's what we can do. I'll handle the initial meetings. Myself. Assess whether this is actually a good fit for our company. If we do move forward, I'll assign Dev's team to the account. They have comparable expertise to yours. You won't be involved at all, not even in internal discussions about the project. Relief washed through me. Thank you for understanding. I value your work too much to put you in an untenable position, Oliver said simply. And frankly, I don't appreciate potential clients using our business relationships for personal leverage. It raises questions about their integrity as partners. I left the meeting feeling both relieved and uneasy. Oliver's support was reassuring, but my father's willingness to invade my professional space was deeply unsettling. It suggested he wasn't simply resistant to my new boundaries, he was actively seeking ways to undermine them. That evening, Carson called as I was preparing dinner. How was Portugal? He asked, genuine enthusiasm in his voice. Amazing, I told him, grateful for the straightforward interest. I have so many photos to show you. How was Lake Tahoe? It was... He hesitated. Tense. Dad was on edge the whole time, checking his phone constantly. I think he was waiting to hear from you. I disconnected while I was away, I said carefully. Needed the break. Yeah, I figured. He paused again. Did you know Dad's company is working with your marketing firm now? So Carson knew about it. Interesting. I just found out today. My boss is handling it. He told everyone at dinner last night that he'd be seeing you in meetings soon, said it was time to bring you back into the fold or something like that. The phrasing sent a chill through me. The fold. Like I was a wayward sheep who needed to be corralled. That won't be happening, I said, trying to keep my tone light for Carson's sake. I've been assigned to other projects. Oh. His relief was audible. That's good. I don't think... I got the feeling it wasn't really about the marketing stuff. No, I agreed. It wasn't. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, picking at my dinner without really tasting it. My father's attempt to force contact through my workplace had been thwarted, but the attempt itself revealed something important. He was escalating. Traditional guilt and manipulation hadn't worked. The silent treatment hadn't worked. Now he was looking for pressure points, vulnerabilities he could exploit to regain control. What would he try next? And was I prepared for it? The new challenge wasn't just about maintaining boundaries with my father. It was about anticipating his increasingly desperate attempts to break them, about protecting the life I had built from his incursions, about staying firm in my resolve even as the pressure mounted. As I cleared away my barely touched dinner, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Phineas. Since you've changed your number, I had to get this one from Allison. We need to talk about why you're refusing to work with me on the marketing project. This behavior is unprofessional and embarrassing. Call me immediately." I stared at the message, noting the familiar tactics: the accusation of unprofessionalism, the demand for immediate compliance, the framing of my boundary as unreasonable behavior. In the past, these tactics had worked reliably to bring me back in line. Not anymore. I blocked the number without responding, then sent a quick email to Oliver documenting that my father had somehow obtained my personal number and was attempting to pressure me directly about the work assignment. It felt strange to create a paper trail about family interactions, but instinct told me it was necessary protection. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that Portugal hadn't been the end of something as I'd half hoped. It had been the beginning of a new kind of challenge, standing firm not just in a moment of emotional clarity, but day after day, as the pressure to revert to old patterns intensified. I was ready. Not because I felt particularly strong or unaffected by the attempted manipulation, but because I had finally understood the cost of surrender. Going backward wasn't an option anymore, no matter how difficult moving forward might be. 3 days after discovering my father's attempt to invade my professional space, I was leaving the office when I spotted his familiar silver Lexus parked across the street. A knot formed in my stomach. I considered ducking back inside, asking a colleague for a ride, avoiding the confrontation entirely. But something in me rebelled against retreating. This was my workplace, my territory. I wouldn't be chased away from it. Taking a deep breath, I walked directly to my car, keys gripped firmly in my hand. As expected, my father emerged from his vehicle when he spotted me, striding across the street with the purposeful gait that had intimidated me since childhood. "Haley." His voice was controlled but tight with anger. "Finally, we need to talk." I faced him squarely, conscious of maintaining physical distance. "This isn't appropriate, Dad. Showing up at my workplace, trying to corner me in the parking lot?" "You've left me no choice," he countered. "You've blocked my calls, ignored my messages, rejected a legitimate business opportunity." "There was nothing legitimate about it," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my directness. "You deliberately sought out my company to force contact after I set clear boundaries." His face flushed. "This victim narrative is getting old, Haley. I reached out to your company because they're highly recommended in the industry. The fact that you work there is a coincidence that could have been advantageous for both of us. The blatant lie might have made me question myself once. Now it just reinforced how necessary my boundaries were." My father wasn't just twisting reality. He was creating an entirely fictional version of events and expecting me to accept it without question. "We both know that's not true," I said calmly. "But it doesn't matter. I'm not discussing this here, in my company parking lot." "Then where? You've made yourself completely unavailable. Your beach house is locked up with some new security code. You've blocked the family from calling or texting. You're acting like we've abused you somehow, when all we've ever done is love and support you." The familiar distortion made something snap inside me. "Is that what you call it? Love and support?" My voice was steady but carried an edge I rarely allowed myself with him. "Telling me a family vacation is just for immediate family? Using Carson's music camp as leverage? Showing up at my workplace to intimidate me?" "No one is intimidating. You?" he scoffed. "You're my daughter. I have a right to speak with you." "You have no rights to me or my time," I said, the clarity of this truth strengthening me. "Our relationship is voluntary, Dad. It exists on mutual terms or not at all." He stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. The concept that I, his daughter, his subordinate in the family hierarchy, could dictate terms was clearly incomprehensible to him. "This is ridiculous," he finally said. "Whatever. phase you're going through, whatever point you're trying to prove, it's affecting the entire family. Sky barely enjoyed her birthday because you weren't there. Carson is withdrawing from everyone. Even Jade is upset about how you've treated us. The attempt to transfer responsibility for everyone's feelings onto me was so familiar, it was almost comforting in its predictability. This was the dynamic I'd been embedded in my entire life. My father creating problems, then holding me accountable for the fallout. I'm sorry they're struggling, I said, and meant it. But I'm not responsible for managing everyone's emotions. I've made choices about how I engage with the family based on how I've been treated. If that's uncomfortable for people, perhaps it's an opportunity to reflect on the dynamics that led us here. Dynamics? He practically spat the word. The only dynamic I see is you suddenly deciding you're too good for your family. That's not what this is about, and I think you know that. I shifted my purse on my shoulder, a physical reminder that I was a grown woman with her own life, not a child to be scolded in a parking lot. Dad, what do you actually want from this conversation? Because if it's to pressure me into pretending everything's fine and going back to how things were, that's not going to happen. The blunt question seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected defensiveness, perhaps tears, certainly eventual capitulation. My calm resistance to his familiar tactics visibly unsettled him. I want my daughter back, he said finally, his voice dropping to a more vulnerable register. I want my family whole again. For a brief moment, I glimpsed what might have been genuine pain beneath his anger. But even this, I realized, was about his needs, his vision of family. One where I played my assigned role without complaint, where his authority remained unchallenged. I'm still your daughter, I said gently. That hasn't changed. What's changed is how I allow myself to be treated. I can't keep accepting less than I deserve in a relationship, even with family. Especially with family. And what exactly do you think you deserve? His tone sharpened again. Special treatment? More attention than everyone else? Because that's what this feels like. Jealousy that the kids get more focus than you do. The deliberate mischaracterization stung, but I recognized it for what it was, another attempt to reframe my legitimate grievances as petty emotions, to position me as unreasonable, rather than acknowledging the patterns that had hurt me. What I deserve is basic respect, I said. Equal consideration, not special treatment. Acknowledgement when I express hurt rather than dismissal. Boundaries that are respected rather than seen as challenges to overcome. And you think cutting off your family is the way to get that? I haven't cut anyone off. I've changed how I engage to protect myself from continuing harm. There's a difference. My father shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. You've changed, Haley. I don't even recognize you anymore. The accusation was meant to hurt, to make me question myself. Instead, it filled me with an unexpected sense of pride. I had changed. I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be, unconstrained by his expectations and demands. I have changed, I agreed. I'm no longer willing to accept scraps of attention and conditional love. I'm no longer making myself smaller to fit the role you've assigned me. I'm no longer pretending that the way you've treated me is okay. So, that's it? After everything I've done for you, after raising you alone after your mother died, this is how you repay me? By making accusations and turning the family against me? The attempt to invoke my mother, to use my grief and gratitude as weapons against me, was the final straw. I took a step back, keys gripped tightly in my hand. I'm not doing this anymore, Dad. Not the guilt trips, not the manipulation, not the distortion of reality. I'm going home now. Please don't show up at my workplace again. We're not finished talking, he insisted, taking a step toward me. Yes, we are, at least for today. I turned toward my car, then paused, looking back at him. And Dad? If you genuinely want to repair our relationship, it starts with acknowledging that there's a legitimate problem. Not with me or my attitude, but with how I've been treated in this family for years. I got into my car before he could respond, locking the doors immediately. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing there, face flushed with anger and something that might have been confusion. For possibly the first time in our relationship, I had refused to follow his script. I had stated my truth without apology and walked away when the conversation became unproductive. As I drove home, emotions swirled through me. Pride in my newfound strength, sadness for the relationship I had, always wanted but never had, fear of what might come next in this escalating conflict. But beneath it all was a steady, quiet certainty. I had faced him directly, on my terms, and I had remained true to myself. Whatever came next, I could handle it. I was no longer the frightened child desperate for approval, no longer the young woman willing to sacrifice her needs for family harmony. I was Haley, whole and complete in herself, worthy of respect and genuine love. The confrontation hadn't resolved anything. My father was far from accepting my perspective or acknowledging his role in our dysfunctional dynamic. But it had confirmed something important. I could stand my ground, speak my truth, and walk away intact. And that, I realized, was a victory in itself. The confrontation with my father in the parking lot marked a turning point. Having faced him directly and maintained my boundaries, I felt a new strength taking root within me. But I also knew better than to expect a quick resolution or sudden understanding from him. This was only the beginning of what would likely be a prolonged struggle for autonomy. Sure enough, the next few weeks brought escalating attempts to break through my defenses. First came the flying monkeys, well-meaning but misguided relatives and family friends who reached out with concerned messages about healing the rift. My father's college roommate called to tell me life was too short for family estrangement. My father's sister emailed suggesting I was being unnecessarily harsh with a man who had sacrificed everything to raise me after my mother died. Even my childhood piano teacher somehow got involved, sending a card expressing hope that I would find my way back to the loving family, who missed me. I responded to each intervention with the same calm clarity. This wasn't about punishment or estrangement, but about establishing healthier patterns of interaction. I wasn't cutting anyone off. I was simply requiring basic respect and equal consideration. If that felt like rejection to my father, perhaps it was worth examining why my self-respect threatened him so deeply. When the flying monkeys failed to move me, the tactics shifted to more direct pressure. Jade sent a carefully worded email about my father's upcoming 60th birthday celebration, a milestone event I hadn't even known was being planned. We're gathering the entire family at the lake house the first weekend in August, she wrote. Everyone is asking if you'll be there. Your father would never say this, but it would mean the world to him to have all his children present on this special occasion. Please don't let recent disagreements stand in the way of celebrating this important milestone. The phrasing was deliberately manipulative, positioning my potential absence as petty and damaging, invoking all his children to emphasize family unity while conveniently ignoring how recently I'd been explicitly excluded from that very category. It was also clearly designed to corner me, refuse to attend and prove I was the unreasonable one, or attend and effectively reset the relationship to its previous dysfunctional pattern. I sat with the invitation for several days, checking in with myself about what felt right rather than what felt expected. Eventually, I responded with a middle path. Thank you for letting me know about Dad's birthday celebration. I won't be able to attend the full weekend at the lake house, but I'd like to take Dad to lunch the following week to celebrate one-on-one. Please let me know if that would work with his schedule. It was a genuine offer. I was willing to acknowledge the milestone and spend time with my father in a controlled setting with clear boundaries. But it was also a statement. I would no longer pretend that group family events were safe or comfortable. Spaces for me, Jade's response was predictably dismissive. That's disappointing. A private lunch isn't the same as being part of the family celebration. I'll tell your father, but he'll be hurt by your choice. In the past, that kind of message would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt. Now, I simply noted the manipulation, the assertion that my compromise was inadequate, the preemptive assignment of hurt feelings, the implication that I was deliberately causing pain rather than protecting myself from it. I didn't engage further. The offer stood: a birthday lunch, a reasonable acknowledgement of the occasion without sacrificing my boundaries. My father could accept it or not. That was his choice to make. When that approach failed to bring me back into line, the tactics escalated again. This time, it was financial pressure. I received an official-looking letter from my father's attorney regarding the beach house. According to the document, my father was claiming he had contributed a significant portion of the down payment as a family investment and was now requesting either financial compensation or partial ownership rights. It was an outrageous claim. I had purchased the property entirely with my own savings and mortgage. My father had not contributed a single penny. In fact, he had tried to talk me out of buying it, calling it too expensive and unnecessary at the time. The legal threat was clearly intended to intimidate me, to demonstrate that my father could and would use his greater resources to punish my independence if necessary. It was also, I suspected, specifically targeted at the beach house because of my refusal to let the family use it after the Lake Tahoe exclusion. Rather than panicking, I calmly gathered my documentation: mortgage records, bank statements showing the source of my down payment, emails and texts from the time of purchase that clearly showed my father had no financial involvement, and forwarded everything to my own attorney. Her response was reassuring. The claim had no legal merit whatsoever and appeared to be purely intimidation. She drafted a firm but professional response stating the facts and warning against further baseless legal threats. After my attorney's letter was sent, I received a text from my father. This didn't have to get legal. I was just trying to protect family interests in a property we've all contributed to in various ways. The attempt to reframe his intimidation as protection, to recast his groundless claim as reasonable concern, was so transparent it almost made me laugh. I didn't respond at all. Some communications didn't deserve acknowledgement. Throughout this period, I maintained my boundaries with quiet determination. I didn't block all contact. Carson and I still texted regularly, and I occasionally responded to messages from Allison or Sky when they weren't obviously orchestrated by my father. But I remained firm about my limits. No unannounced visits, no guilt trips, no pretending that deeply hurtful patterns were simply misunderstandings. The constancy of the pressure was exhausting at times. There were moments when I questioned whether the peace I was fighting for was worth the ongoing conflict, whether it might be easier to simply go back to the old patterns of appeasement and accommodation. In those moments of doubt, I turned to the support system I had been cultivating, Arlo, whose friendship had deepened through our shared experiences, Uncle Dev, who provided both emotional support and practical advice, my therapist, who helped me recognize manipulation tactics and affirm my right to boundaries, even Maureen, who had begun sending occasional messages of encouragement. I also found strength in the small victories, the moments when I could see my growth reflected in changed responses to old triggers. When Jade sent a passive-aggressive group text about how some people prioritize their own comfort over family bonds, I felt a momentary flash of shame but didn't rush to defend myself. When I ran into Allison at a local restaurant and she made a pointed comment about my absence from family gatherings, I responded with calm clarity rather than anxious justification. Perhaps the most significant test came 6 weeks after the parking lot confrontation, when my father escalated to what he clearly believed was his nuclear option. He contacted my mother's parents, my maternal grandparents, with whom I had maintained a loving but somewhat distant relationship since their retirement to Arizona years ago. My grandmother called, her voice tight with worry. "Haley, your father called us. He says you're having some kind of breakdown, that you've cut off the family and won't speak to anyone. Is everything all right, dear?" The attempt to triangulate, to use my connection to my mother's memory as leverage, was breathtakingly manipulative. But instead of responding with hurt or anger, I saw an opportunity for greater honesty. "I'm actually doing better than I have in years, Grandma," I said truthfully. "I've started setting some boundaries with Dad and his family that were long overdue. It's causing some tension, but it's necessary for my well-being." Boundaries. She sounded unsure of the concept as it applied to family. Yes. For a long time, I've accepted being treated as less important, less part of the family than Dad's other children. Recently, I decided I deserved better than that. There was a pause. Then my grandmother said something that knocked the breath from my lungs. "Your mother would be proud of you. She always worried that Phineas would, well, that he wouldn't see you clearly after she was gone." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Eliza knew your father better than anyone. She loved him deeply, but she saw his tendencies to focus on what was new and exciting, to lose interest in projects or people once the novelty wore off." My grandmother's voice softened with memory. "She made him promise, in those final weeks, that he would always put you first. I think she knew it wouldn't come naturally to him." The revelation of my mother's awareness, her attempt to protect me even as she was leaving us, brought tears to my eyes. But it also reinforced the rightness of my current path. I wasn't betraying her memory by establishing boundaries with my father. I was honoring her concern by finally protecting myself as she would have wanted. After that conversation, something settled in me. A deeper certainty that I was not just reacting emotionally, but responding to patterns that had been evident to others long before I could recognize them myself. The pressure from my father and his family continued, but it no longer had the power to shake my resolve. I was holding the line not just for my current peace, but for the little girl who had lost her mother, the teenager who had swallowed her needs to keep the peace, the young woman who had accepted less than she deserved for far too long. I was holding the line for all the versions of myself that had needed protection but hadn't received it. And I would continue to hold it, not out of bitterness or revenge, but out of a newfound love for myself that was stronger than my fear of disapproval. 3 months after the Lake Tahoe vacation that had triggered this seismic shift in my family, relationships. A different rhythm had established itself in my life. The constant barrage of manipulation attempts had gradually tapered off as my father and Jade realized their usual tactics no longer worked. The frequent flying monkeys had reduced to occasional check-ins. The emotional intensity had ebbed, leaving space for a new kind of equilibrium. I had lunch with my father for his 60th birthday, as I'd offered. We met at a neutral restaurant halfway between our homes, the public setting helping to keep interactions civil. The conversation was strained but not hostile. We spoke mostly of surface topics, avoiding the deeper issues that remained unresolved. When he made a pointed comment about the beach house, I calmly changed the subject. When he suggested I join an upcoming family dinner, to put all this nonsense behind us, I simply said I wasn't ready for that yet, but appreciated the invitation. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a civil interaction that maintained my boundaries without severing the relationship entirely. It felt like the most realistic outcome given his continued unwillingness to acknowledge the patterns that had led to our current situation. My relationships with my half-siblings had evolved in divergent ways. Allison, always the most aligned, with our father's perspective, had largely withdrawn, our communications reduced to occasional likes on social media posts. Sky, surprisingly, had begun reaching out independently, texting me about school projects, asking advice about college applications, maintaining a connection that was tentatively developing its own footing outside the family power structure. Carson. And I had grown closer through the upheaval. At 17, he was increasingly able to see the family dynamics clearly and form his own opinions. We had dinner every few weeks, just the two of us, building a relationship based on genuine connection rather than obligatory family ties. My professional life flourished in the space created by healthier boundaries, free from frequent family interruptions and emotional drainage. I secured a major new client and received a substantial promotion at work. The beach house, once a constant revolving door of family use, became truly mine. A sanctuary where I could invite friends for weekend getaways, host small dinner parties, or simply enjoy solitude without fear of unannounced visitors. I resumed occasional contact with extended family members who had shown respect for my boundaries, including a deepening friendship with Aunt Arlo that was evolving into a meaningful connection independent of her relationship with Jade. Uncle Dev and I spoke weekly, rebuilding a relationship that felt increasingly important as I reconstructed my understanding of my early childhood and my mother's memory. The most significant change, however, was internal. The constant background anxiety that had been my lifelong companion, the fear of disapproval, the compulsive need to check my phone for family messages, the automatic prioritization of others, needs over my own, had receded dramatically. In its place was a growing sense of confidence in my own judgment and worth. Was it perfect? No. There were still difficult days, still moments when old guilt surfaced, still occasional new attempts at manipulation that required fresh responses. But these were ripples on the surface of a life that had fundamentally transformed. This new, normal wasn't defined by the absence of my original family, but by the presence of healthier relationships, with them when possible, with others when not, and most importantly, with myself. 1 year to the day after the group chat message that had started it all, that moment when I discovered I wasn't included in the immediate family vacation plans, I sat on my deck watching the sunset over Monterey Bay. The anniversary hadn't gone unnoticed. I had deliberately taken the day off work to reflect on the journey of the past 12 months. So much had changed in a single year. External circumstances, certainly. Relationships, reconfigured, boundaries established, patterns broken. But the most profound changes had been internal. The shifts in perspective that had allowed me to see clearly what had been obscured for decades by guilt, obligation, and desperate hope for approval. The wisdom gained through this challenging year could be distilled into several truths that I now carried with me. First, I had learned that love without respect is not really love at all. True love sees the other person clearly and honors their autonomy. It doesn't demand submission, doesn't withhold affection as punishment, doesn't treat the relationship as conditional upon compliance. What my father had offered was not love, but control disguised as care, possession masked as protection. Second, I had discovered that family is defined by behavior, not blood. The accident of birth or marriage creates biological or legal connections, but family, true family, is built through consistent acts of respect, support, and genuine care. Some of my blood relatives had proven themselves incapable of family behavior. Some non-relatives, like Arlo and friends who had supported me through the year's challenges, had demonstrated what family should truly mean. Third, I had finally understood that boundaries are not punishments inflicted on others, but protection extended to oneself. Every time I had maintained a limit despite pressure or guilt, I was not rejecting my father, but respecting myself. This perspective transformed boundaries from negative to positive, from weapons to shields. Fourth, I had realized that I could not heal relationships by allowing them to harm me. For years, I had sacrificed my well-being in hopes that enough self-erasure would eventually earn me the love and inclusion I craved. But meaningful connection could never grow from such unbalanced soil. Only by standing firmly in my truth could I create the possibility of healthier relationships, even if that meant some relationships might not survive the transition. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I had learned that I was enough, exactly as I was, without contortion or apology. My worth was inherent, not earned through usefulness or compliance. My voice deserved to be heard. My needs deserved consideration. My boundaries deserved respect. This truth, so simple yet so elusive for most of my life, had become the foundation upon which everything else now rested. As the last rays of sun disappeared below the horizon, I thought about the beach house, the property that had become such a flashpoint in the family conflict. My father had seen it as a resource to which he was entitled access. I had finally recognized it as a symbol of my independence, a physical manifestation of boundaries that deserved protection. Just that morning, I had received an email from my father. Brief, somewhat stiff, but noticeably lacking the manipulative tactics that had characterized his communications for most of the past year. Haley, I've been reflecting on things. While I still don't understand or agree with many of your choices this past year, I recognize that my approach hasn't helped the situation. Jade and I are planning a small gathering for Thanksgiving. If you're comfortable attending, you'd be welcome. If not, perhaps we could arrange a different time to meet. Your father. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the patterns I had named, but it was perhaps a small step toward meeting me where I now stood rather than demanding I return to where I had been. I hadn't responded yet. I would, after giving it proper thought and checking in with myself about what felt right. But the fact that I could receive such a message without immediate anxiety, without automatic guilt, without the compulsive need to reply instantly and soothe his feelings, that itself was evidence of how far I had come. The darkness settled around me, stars appearing one by one in the clear night sky. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago. I was stronger, clearer, more authentically myself. Whatever happened with my family going forward, whether relationships slowly rebuilt on healthier foundations or remained distant with occasional contact, I would never go back to accepting less than I deserved. That was the ultimate wisdom. Gained, the quiet, unshakable certainty that I mattered, that I was, and always had been, a real child, deserving of real love. Not just when convenient, not just when compliant, but always. And that knowledge, hard-won through a year of painful growth, was worth everything it had cost to obtain. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.